Mr. President, with me today is one of my colleagues from my office, Mr. Nick Ayers, whose good judgment and counsel I depend on. Mr. President, I want to talk about the Medicaid portion of our reconciliation bill, which the President calls our one big, beautiful bill. And I want to talk about the rest of the story. Now, the Congressional Budget Office is a bipartisan entity, as you know, Mr. President, that advises us on fiscal and financial matters. And I appreciate their good work. A lot of smart people over there. The CBO, as we call it, has issued a report that says, as a result of our reconciliation bill, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill, that 10.5 million Americans are going to be thrown off Medicaid. Let me say that again. CBO says that as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill, 10.5 million Americans are going to be thrown off the Medicaid rolls as a result of our bill. And I don't want to be unfair to CBO, but sometimes CBO makes these statements and they don't give you the context in which they're making the statements. If you say we're going to throw 10.5 million people off of Medicaid and don't explain in detail why they come to that conclusion, that's not fair. You're not getting the full story. You're not getting reliable information. That would be like asking a nun for advice about sex. So let me tell you the other half of the story. I talked about this last week a little bit. Of the 10.5 million people that CBO says we're throwing off of Medicaid, they weren't eligible for Medicaid in the first place. I'm going to say that again. CBO says we're throwing 10.5 million people off of Medicaid. They weren't eligible for Medicaid in the first place. I talked about this a little bit last week. For example, the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services just came out a report with a report of those 10.5 million people that we're throwing off of Medicaid. 2.8 million of them are double dipping. They're double dipping. That's illegal. That's a violation of the rules. That means that a person is signed up. I'm from Louisiana. That means some people are signed up in both Louisiana and Mississippi, for example. You can't double dip. And the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services also found that of that 2.5 million people, 1.6 million of them are double dipping by joining Medicaid and Obamacare. So yeah, they're going to lose their Medicaid. They should. That double dipping costs us $14 billion a year, $140 billion over 10 years. We think in 10-year cycles. That's money that we could use to help people who really deserve Medicaid. So yeah, my friends at CBO, those people are going to lose their Medicaid. Did I mention that they weren't entitled to it in the first place? Now, point two, the reason that the main determinant for Medicaid is income. It's not the only one. The main determinant is income. States are not supposed to sign up people for Medicaid who make too much money. And I regret to say this. I don't know why, but it's human nature. Some people don't tell the truth. Under President Biden, he encouraged the states not to check income eligibility. Just take everybody's word for it. Well, you know, you've probably heard me say this before, but I trust people. But I also, when I play poker, I play with friends. They're good friends of mine, but I always cut the cards. I believe in the old adage, you know, trust in God, but tie up your camel anyway. If the president sends a message to the states, don't worry about checking if people are making too much money, guess what? Some people are going to cheat, and they do. I wish they didn't, but they do. Back in my state of Louisiana, our legislative auditor, Louisiana legislative auditor, which audits all the spending in the state, found that they did an exhaustive audit of our Medicaid program. They found back in 2019 that 1,600 people had been signed up for Medicaid, making over $100,000 a year. 1,600 people making over $100,000 a year. Yes, CBO, they're going to lose their Medicaid. They weren't entitled to it in the first place. The legislative auditor went on to point out that Louisiana paid $85.5 million in Medicaid payments for patients who weren't eligible for coverage because they made too much money. And my legislative auditor in Louisiana, we have a lot of people on Medicaid. He couldn't go through the numbers for each and every one of them, so he had to do a statistical sample. And he listed, I won't show you the list of all of them. You could stand on the thing and paint the ceiling. But he found, for example, on our Medicaid rolls in Louisiana, someone making $111,785. Here's another person on Medicaid making $126,284. Another making $104,921. Another making $114,797. This is Louisiana. Our median family income's only $56,000. These folks aren't qualified for Medicaid. They're taking money away from people who deserve it. So yes, CBO, who on this issue is giving us their advice, I'm going to say it again. It's like asking a nun about advice on sex. CBO's not telling us the full story. Yeah, they're going to lose their Medicaid. They're not qualified for Medicaid. They're cheating. Let me talk about a third way that CBO is misleading us. And I'm not saying CBO is doing it intentionally. Some may say otherwise, but I'm not saying that. I'm just saying they need to explain their answer. If you say we're throwing 10.5 million people off Medicaid, you know, you got to give us the rest of the story. It's not fair to just take that out of context. Technically, they may be right. But did I mention I can't remember if I mentioned this, these 10.5 million people weren't qualified to get Medicaid in the first place. Now, we also put in our reconciliation bill, as the President calls it, the big, beautiful bill, a work requirement. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes the best way to get back on your feet is to get off your ass. Now, the American people are the most generous people in the world. We spend trillions of dollars helping our neighbors. In our country, if you are hungry, we will feed you. If you're homeless, we will house you. If you're too poor to be sick, we will pay for your doctor. That's why we have Medicaid. That's why we have Medicare. But those who can work should work. Our social programs were not meant to be parking lots. They were meant to be bridges. Sometimes, it's not always. If you're disabled, you should be on Medicaid. If you're too poor, you should be on Medicaid. But we've got a lot of people on Medicaid. We're not sure exactly how many who could work. They choose not to. So when we passed this bill, my Democratic friends opposed us every step of the way. But we passed, over their objections, a work requirement. Now, if you're on Medicaid, the expansion part of Medicaid, I don't want to digress here, but if you sign up on the expansion part of Medicaid, if you are 19 to 64 years old, if you're not disabled, so I'm not talking about a mother with a sick child in her arms. If you're 19 to 64, if you're not disabled, if you're healthy, and you don't have a child at home under 14, we're saying we'll give you Medicaid, but you've got to work. Not 40 hours a week, 80 hours a month. For 80 hours a month in return for the free medical care, you've got to go try to get a job. You can go to worker training, or you can do community service. And hopefully, you'll become gainfully employed, and you won't need Medicaid. Because a person without a job is not healthy, he's not happy, and he's not free. We don't know exactly how many people are on the Medicaid expansion who can work but aren't working. There have been some estimates. I've seen them all over the map. I was looking at one in The Economist recently. They estimate that 6% of the 71 million people on Medicaid are able-bodied and could work but choose not to. That's 6 million people. That's 6 million people. If the average amount spent per person on Medicaid is $9,000 a year. So if we could get all of those 6 million people to work, and we'll help them find a job, we'd save $54 billion a year. That's $500 billion a year over a 10-year period. So yes, CBO, it's true that if someone is covered by the work requirement and they say, I don't want to work, I choose not to work, then they're going to lose their Medicaid. And again, we're not talking about somebody disabled or somebody pregnant. We're not talking about a mother with 3 young children. We're talking about able-bodied adults, 19 to 64. They're healthy, and they don't have kids at home. All we're saying is, come join the American dream and get a job. So yes, CBO, they'll lose their Medicaid. They weren't eligible for it in the first place. So I just want to say to my friends at CBO, I don't mean any disrespect. I don't. They're really smart people. But when you're going to throw these numbers around, like 10.5 million people are going to be thrown off Medicaid, you ought to explain why. So the CBO report, as far as I'm concerned, is all salt and no tequila. They don't tell us why 10.5 million people are going to lose their Medicaid. And unless you have an opium habit, you'll see, if you drill down and understand and try to understand, that those 10.5 million people, God bless them, but they weren't eligible for Medicaid in the first place. And these reforms that we're making to Medicaid are going to be able to provide much more money for the disabled Americans, the truly impoverished Americans, the truly sick Americans, the children who are too poor to be sick in our country. We're going to take this money that we're saving and give them the quality health care they deserve. And even after all these reforms, guess what? Hope you're listening, CBO. We aren't cutting Medicaid. Even after all these reforms, Medicaid's going to go up 20% over the next 10 years. And that's the rest of the story, Mr. President. My work here is done. I yield the floor to my good friend, Harvard graduate. He went to Harvard. You know that, Mr. President? Smart as a whip. Mind like a steel trap, Senator Tom Cotton.
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the Senator from Arkansas.
Well, here we go again. Hamas is on the verge of defeat, so it's cranked up the propaganda machine once again. Now, Hamas wants the world to believe that Israel has undertaken a campaign of deliberate starvation of the Gazan population. And as usual, Hamas can count on an international media and political chorus to fight their battles for them and try to bully Israel into submission. So I'd like to set the record straight. First, let me observe that no decent person wants to see innocent children caught in the crosshairs of war and suffering from hunger and malnutrition. Israel agrees, of course. That's why, since Hamas started this war with its brutal atrocities, Israel has helped bring into Gaza approximately 96,000 trucks containing nearly 1.5 million tons of food, 46,000 tons of medical supplies, 60,000 tons of water, and around 170,000 tons of shelter equipment. Put simply, children in Gaza aren't going hungry because of lack of supplies from Israel. They're suffering because Hamas uses food and humanitarian aid as a weapon to stay in power. Now, you may see these easels next to me and believe I'm about to show you heart-wrenching images of malnourished kids. That's what some more gullible senators have done lately, and I'm afraid to say gullible might be a charitable way to describe their motives. Much like the New York Times buying hook, line, and sinker the images of Gazan children afflicted with terrible diseases, but passed off as malnourished. But no, I have other images to show, namely the immense volume of food that's being ruthlessly withheld from the children of Gaza. Pallets and pallets of United Nations aid are just waiting to be distributed to the children of Gaza. Some of these contain canned goods, such as chickpeas, white beans, green peas, and carrots. But these supplies, at this very moment, are sitting and baking in the hot sun instead of feeding hungry kids. While this situation is shocking, it's not at all surprising. After all, Hamas's infiltration of UN aid mechanisms is well documented. Time and again, we have seen Hamas terrorists divert aid shipments to themselves or loot delivery trucks, only to resell the supplies on the black market at outrageous prices. Last year, this terrorist-infiltrated aid system, managed by the UN and others, allowed Hamas to rake in more than $500 million in profit. Profits that fund Hamas's campaign of terror against Israel and its own people. How critical is this systematic theft to Hamas's grip on power? Well, one of Hamas's chief demands in recent ceasefire negotiations has been the dismantling of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, a new charity created specifically to end Hamas's stranglehold on aid and supplies. The foundation has even offered to distribute UN aid for free, despite the risk to its own people. And much of this aid, which is sitting in the sun and partly taxpayer funded, is already inside Gaza. It simply needs to be picked up and distributed. But the offer has fallen on deaf ears because Hamas uses humanitarian aid as a tool to fund, facilitate, and fight its war against innocent children, against Israel, against the civilized world. And Hamas's cheerleaders, apologists, and dupes in Europe and America, and sadly here in the U.S. Senate, once again turn a blind eye to Hamas's crimes, blaming instead Israel and the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. They demand that Israel agree to a ceasefire that preserves and rewards Hamas, while also delivering even more humanitarian aid to Gaza for Hamas to steal and exploit. They expect Israel to feed the very people who attacked, raped, and murdered innocent Israeli men, women, and children on October 7th. And I would remind everyone, not a few American victims as well. Once again, Israel is facing demands placed on no other nation in the world. I don't recall from my history lessons, for instance, the United States providing humanitarian aid to Germany and Japan in World War II. On the contrary, the Allies imposed naval blockades that led to widespread shortages in those enemy nations. When, in the annals of history, has the victim of an unprovoked war of aggression ever been held responsible for the nutrition of the aggressor? Put simply, Israel doesn't have any responsibility to send a single loaf of bread to Gaza. I wonder why so many senators, pundits, podcasters, and European politicians impose this unique standard on the Jewish nation. Why could it be? But despite all that, despite the brutal slaughter of nearly 1,200 Israelis on October 7th, despite Hamas's continued repression of its own people, Israel is still delivering aid to Gaza, while Hamas rips it from the hands of hungry children. Once again, we see very simply and very clearly in this war who is on the side of justice and who is on the side of evil. And I would ask anyone who places these singular demands on Israel, whose side do you want to be on? And if you truly care about the children of Gaza, as I do, as Israelis do, as any decent person surely does, I would encourage you to support President Trump's statement of moral clarity and strength from earlier this morning. The fastest way to end the humanitarian crises in Gaza is for Hamas to surrender and release the hostages. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsterbrooks.
Mr. President.
Chair recognizes the senator from Georgia.
Mr. President, I rise today in the wake of the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe unfolding.
Sir, the Senate's in a quorum call.
I ask that it be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today in the wake of the ongoing humanitarian catastrophe unfolding before our eyes in Gaza. As we say in my church's preaching tradition, let me make it plain. It is wrong to starve children to death. It is wrong to starve people to death. Yet in this moment, we are witnessing a famine unfold among children and innocent men and women in Gaza, the world's largest open-air prison, a pit of human misery. Reports estimate 18,500 Palestinian children have been killed in the conflict. Over 20,000 children were treated for acute malnutrition between April and mid-July of this year. And at least 3,000 children were severely malnourished. In Gaza today, starvation is being weaponized. Famine isn't a forecast, but a fact, despite the denials of the Netanyahu government. And so I rise today not only as a senator, but as a pastor of the church where Martin Luther King Jr. served, who told us that we are tied in a single garment of destiny, caught up in an inescapable network of mutuality. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I rise today as a father to say there is devastating starvation going on right now. And all of us, the state of Israel, the United States, and the world, cannot turn our eyes away. We must get to these people the food, the medicine, the dignity that their humanity requires. The images of mass starvation are sickening. Children with no family, bare feet, empty bellies, hollow eyes, who are seeking aid only to be trampled to death by other desperate people. And in their most desperate moments, some have been met not with mercy or medicine, but with malice. Young people seeking bread have been met with bullets. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu must stop using indiscriminate bombing and forced starvation, and instead focus on a lasting moral peace that secures the return of the remaining hostages while respecting the dignity of Palestinian families and children who want the same peace as our Israeli brothers and sisters. All of us are children of the living God. And in the eyes of suffering children, we see a glimpse of God's face. After international outcry and public shaming, it was a welcomed announcement that Prime Minister Netanyahu would allow more aid into Gaza and enact military pauses to allow food to reach people, but what has been delivered so far is just a drop in the bucket of what this moment requires. The people of Gaza deserve the same access to food and medicine that we would want, any one of us would want for our own children. Now, there's no question that peace in the Middle East is a tough issue. If it were easy, it would have been resolved by now. And we cannot forget about what happened on October 7th. And we must continue to call on Hamas to free the hostages. These folks deserve to go home. They deserve to be home with their families. So we call on Hamas to release the hostages. And as I've said time and time again, including in the wake of October 7th, Israel has a right to defend itself. But what is happening now? Children are being wounded. Many of them have been orphaned. Pregnant and nursing mothers are having to navigate a war zone while nourishing their children. And beyond the obvious moral atrocity, the question is, how has this continuing bombing and mass starvation made our friend Israel safer? How has this made Israel safer? And at what cost? I urge President Trump, who has said that there is, quote, real starvation in Gaza, to leverage American leadership to bring an end to this human suffering. Human lives are at stake, and America's moral credibility is on the line. Inflicting human misery for its own sake is not a strategy. Starving the people of Gaza has not released any hostages or gotten us any closer to a ceasefire. The current trajectory is unsustainable. I do not believe that the answer to death and destruction is more death and destruction. There's this phrase in Gaza, it's an acronym, WCNSF. Wounded child, no surviving family. I can't think of a worse way to begin your life than to be a child or a baby wounded with no family. This phrase takes on new meaning as we are hearing stories out of Gaza of parents starving to death to give what little food they have to keep their children alive. So here's what I believe. I believe in the humanity of all of God's children. And that's why I pressed the previous administration and the Netanyahu administration to get more humanitarian aid into Gaza. I voted to give $10 billion in humanitarian aid to Gaza and other humanitarian crises. And just this month, I joined more than 40 of my colleagues calling for the large-scale expansion of humanitarian aid, and I urged the Trump administration to resume diplomatic efforts to end this war. I also called on the administration to end the United States' support and financing for the shady private organization that has been connected to deadly violence against starving people seeking food in Gaza. We must instead resume support for the existing UN-led aid efforts with enhanced oversight to ensure that help reaches those in need. My North Star in this whole conflict is a world that embraces children on both sides of this conflict. Because here's the thing that even mortal enemies have in common. All of us want our children to be okay. We all want our children to be safe. And as I said this on the floor of the Senate, when I called for the ceasefire at a time when folks felt like you couldn't even say the word, this pressure has prompted temporary pauses in violence and some aid, but it is clear that these piecemeal steps are failing. America is Israel's friend. However, being a friend to Israel does not mean being complicit in its government's immoral actions unfolding even as I speak. Israel's strength is rooted in its allies. But allyship, true allyship, involves accountability. Here's how I know when I've got a good friend. Good friends tell you the truth. We must tell Netanyahu he must change course. The Israeli government's current path is hurting the country's global standing and support in the world. So in the end, this growing humanitarian crisis is not good for Israel. Good friends tell you the truth. And that is why yesterday I voted in favor of the joint resolutions of disapproval. I've been thinking of the words of my mentor, my hero, who happened also to be my parishioner, the late, great John Lewis. John Lewis said that when you see something is not right, not fair, not just, you have to speak up. And so I'm speaking up. I'm speaking with my lips and my legs because the acid test of your faith is your commitment to the most marginalized members of the human family. We must work towards saving lives and centering our common humanity, returning the hostages home to their families, and securing peace and safety for all those in the region. Last year, I had the honor of meeting with the late Pontiff, Pope Francis, at the Vatican. And I was struck by something the Pope said to me. He said to me that there was a small parish in Gaza that he called practically every night just to check on them, just to pray for them. Leader of Catholics all over the world, he called that little parish to pray with them. Well, the other day, that church was bombed. As it turns out, there was no sanctuary for them, even in the sanctuary. And so tonight, I'm going to say a special prayer, not only for the people of that parish, but for the people all around them. I'm going to pray for peace. But we don't just pray with our lips, we have to pray with our legs. We have to work for the world that we dream of for our children. History may not remember the debates that we had in these chambers, but it will remember whether we acted when children were starving and hostages were languishing. Silence is complicity. Inaction in the face of famine is a choice. So let us choose life, dignity, and a peace worthy of the ideals we claim to pursue. I yield the floor.
Chair recognizes the senator from Alaska.
Mr. President, is the Senate in a quorum call?
It is not.
Thank you, Mr. President. Now, Mr. President, it's Thursday afternoon here in the United States Senate, and I'm going to come down and talk about the Alaskan of the week. Best speech of the week, I think. The pages would agree. They're all nodding, right? Because it talks about someone who's really amazing. This week is a really impressive story, I will tell you. And normally, Mr. President, the Alaskan of the week, that's kind of the wrap-up bell signal for the Senate, for the press. They kind of know the week's coming to an end. But not today. We're still working before the summer August work period to try and get some of President Trump's nominees confirmed. Huge part of the Senate's duties. And we're trying to get cooperation from our other colleagues on the other side of the aisle. Now, why am I talking about this? Because, Mr. President, I know the Alaskan of the Week speech, millions of Americans tune in. It's like must-see TV when they're all watching, the press watches. So I just want to explain a little bit what's going on here, because we have this unprecedented blockade by the Senate Minority Leader, Chuck Schumer, that's not good for the Senate as an institution. By the way, all the Democrats know that. It's not good for the country to get the president, his people, confirmed to help run the government. And, Mr. President, it's never been done before. What do I mean? So the way the Senate works, it's a really important chart here. The way the Senate works is when we go to confirm nominees, cabinet officials and very important nominees, some who are controversial, some who aren't. A lot of times the Senate moves because there's so many of them with a package of nominees. We usually take a big package, it's negotiated, and then they come to the floor as a package agreed to by leadership, and we do what's called a unanimous consent request. We don't vote on each one. It might be a package of 100. And the majority leader will say, I move to unanimous consent to confirm these 100 nominees. This happens all the time. This has been happening for hundreds of years in American history. Guess who stopped that tradition? The current Senate Minority Leader, Senator Schumer of New York. Now, why would he do that? Look at these numbers. In George H.W. Bush, during his first term, 98% of the people confirmed for that administration, Democrat, Republican, were done by this unanimous consent model. We'll package them up, we'll bring them to the floor, we do a unanimous consent, they're all passed. Nobody objects, okay? And this is the way you do it. Clinton. So remember, this is cooperation. You need Democrats and Republicans in this great institution, the United States Senate, to do this, to help the government work. Okay, President Clinton, same thing, Republicans did unanimous consent requests. 98% of the people in the Clinton administration, not civilians, not the generals and admirals. George W. Bush got a little smaller, still 90%. So the Democrats worked with George W. Bush to confirm all their nominees. Obama, Republicans worked with President Obama to confirm 90% through unanimous consent, big packages of nominees to get confirmed so the government can work. Okay, President Trump's first term, a lot less, so all of a sudden the Democrats are saying, we're not going to cooperate as much during Trump 1, but it was still, Mr. President, still 65% of the nominees were packaged up, brought to the floor, unanimous consent, let's move them. Did that, okay? So there was a little bit of like, hey, you didn't help President Trump too much. So with President Biden, it was less, but it was still way more than half, almost 60%. President Biden's guys would come here, hey, we don't want to get all these guys confirmed. We Republicans said, all right, well, let's put it in package. Let's look who they are. All right, we'll confirm 100 here, 100 there, okay? Almost 60% of all Biden nominees were confirmed in that way. Unanimous consent, quickly. A lot of times before the August work period, we'll get big packages done, okay? So that's American history. look at the number for President Trump's second term. Can you see that? I want the American people to see that. 0. 0. 0. Like, what the heck is Senator Schumer doing? By the way, a lot of Democrat senators who I talk to, I got good friends over there, they're embarrassed by that number, by the way. They're embarrassed by that number. 0%. Now, why do you think Senator Schumer's doing that? Because he cares about the Senate as an institution? Nope. Because he wants to help us run the government? President Trump won fair and square. He needs to get his people into office to run our great government? Nope, certainly don't want to do that. Mr. President, we all know this. I'm going to reveal a little secret here in the Senate. This is fully driven by the far left wing of the Democratic Party. Okay? I mean, we're talking the anti-Israel, pro-Hamas wing. We're talking the defund the police wing. We're talking the open border wing. I mean, the far left crazies of the Democratic Party are driving the Senate minority leader to go to 0 because they're telling him, you got to resist the Trump administration. So he's listening to them. Look at that, America. 0%. It's never happened in U.S. history. I hope our friends in the media write about it, but it is unprecedented. And it's just, look, the vast majority of Democratic senators who I've talked to are embarrassed by that number. So hopefully we're going to get some kind of an agreement. We'll see. But maybe not. We'll stay here. Look, I'm ready to stay here as long as it takes, because this is ridiculous. And one guy's blocking it. It's the minority leader of the U.S. Senate because he's kowtowing to the far left crazy wing of the Democratic Party to resist. And we think that's good for America right there? It's embarrassing. If you're a Senate Democrat, that's embarrassing. So, Mr. President, I'm going to switch gears to a much better topic. But like I said, normally this would be the last speech of the week. It's not, because we're still here, and we'll keep plugging away. We're going to vote to confirm a lot more of President Trump's cabinet. We got to do it one at a time, because there's no cooperation, as there has been throughout American history. So we'll do it the hard way. So I applaud the Majority Leader, John Thune, to say, hey, let's try. We're still trying to get an agreement. Maybe they'll move this number up a little bit, but that's an embarrassment. Every senator knows it, and every senator here knows why it's 0. Not guarding the institution, not trying to help the American people run their government. It's nervousness from some of the Democrat leaders about their far left extreme open border, defund the police. You know, the wackos are driving it. So we'll keep plugging along. So, Mr. President, let me get to my Alaskan of the week, because this is a great story, and it's very inspiring. And I want all the pages and everybody in America, and certainly back home in Alaska, to hear about Angela Harris. Now, I always do a little update on what's going on back home. I was back home last weekend. Summer's in full swing. The fish are running. Boy, oh boy, the Kenai River is having a world record sockeye salmon run. I got to do a little fishing last week on the Kenai. It's incredible. If you love fishing, America, come on up. There's no better fishing in the whole world. By the way, the Kenai River is just spectacular. This unreal glacial blue river. It's just amazing. It's majestic. It's indescribable. The midnight sun is out in Utqiagvik, Barrow, our northernmost community. The sun still won't set for another few weeks, so it's been up for weeks. No sunset. Just a great community there. The summers in Alaska just have so much energy. It's everywhere. It's in our waters. It's in our salmon, streams, and rivers. It's tourists. We got a lot of tourists, millions. And we got our great Coast Guard, America's Coast Guard, always on duty, ready to respond, ready to protect. So, Mr. President, the Coast Guard, we're coming up on the 235th birthday of the Coast Guard. Our great men and women of the Coast Guard for over 2 centuries have been always ready, semper paratus, to defend our nation, guard our waters, respond to disasters. By the way, we got some heroic Coast Guard members doing great work recently in those horrible floods down in Texas. I had the opportunity to meet them. And in Alaska, Mr. President, with more coastline than the rest of the country combined, that's right, 33,000 miles of rugged coastline in Alaska. That's more than the rest of the country combined. The Coast Guard is on duty all the time. In 2024 alone, they responded to almost 1,000 calls and saved over 200 lives, just in my state alone. I mean, you want to talk about heroic members of our military. And of course, that's not all they do. Alaska's Coast Guard is uniquely positioned on the front lines of national security. I like to talk about it a lot in the Armed Services Committee, but we are seeing an unprecedented push by the Russians and Chinese into Alaska's airspace and Alaska's waters. We just had a Russian Bear bomber, a couple strategic bombers in our ADIZ, our Alaska Air Identification Zone, just last week. Our military had to go, fighters go up and intercept them. But our Coast Guard helps monitor these kind of incursions and keeps our northern maritime border secure. They do this all across our state in communities like Kodiak, Sitka, Valdez, Juneau. They are our friends. Coast Guard members are our neighbors, our mentors, our volunteers. They are really integrated into the Alaskan communities where they serve. And we owe them, Mr. President, a huge debt of gratitude. So, with the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, one element that is really not getting a lot of coverage, which is so great, is that that bill secured the biggest investment in the U.S. Coast Guard in U.S. history. That's not an exaggeration. That is what happened. Over $25 billion for our Coast Guard, and they need it. I love our military, all services. The Coast Guard is often the redheaded stepchild in terms of getting up-to-date equipment and gear and cutters and hangars. This is a home run for the Coast Guard in terms of capital investments. 17 new icebreakers. Right now we have 2 icebreakers and one is broken. Russia has 54. Okay, we are way behind. 40 new helicopters, 22 cutters. I mean, this is a generational investment for the Coast Guard. And as the chairman of the Commerce Subcommittee overseeing the Coast Guard, this was a top priority of mine. I work closely with our Commerce Committee Chair, Senator Cruz, on making this happen. Giant investment, huge home run for our Coast Guard in the communities that support them, like Juneau, Alaska. Mr. President, on August 10th, I'm going to be hosting the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Commandant of the Coast Guard. We're going to be in Juneau to commission the U.S. Coast Guard vessel, the Storis, an icebreaker, to be home ported finally in Alaska. We've been trying to get an icebreaker home port in Alaska forever. You'd think the Coast Guard would want to put an icebreaker where the ice is. Well, they're finally going to do it, and that's going to be great. It's going to be a great August. I'm hosting several of President Trump's cabinet, Secretary Duffy, Secretary Turner, Secretary Kennedy, Secretary of Homeland Security, Nome. It's going to be a busy time up in Alaska. So we love our Coast Guard, and we are finally making the proper investment. So why am I talking so much about the Coast Guard? Because our Alaskan of the Week, Angela Harris, is a coastie. And boy, oh boy, is she a fierce competitor of a Coast Guard member. Let me just give a little bit of a quick bio of her. A mother, a fierce competitor in archery, cycling, indoor rowing, powerlifting, track, and rugby. And Mr. President, unfortunately, but in some ways, you know, it showed her grit, a survivor of a random attack that left her paralyzed in a wheelchair. This incredible woman, Angela Harris, is our Alaskan of the Week today. So let's talk a little bit about Angela. Yeoman First Class Angela Harris joined the U.S. Coast Guard in the summer of 1998 after feeling a call to serve her country and see the world. The ocean's always been where I feel most at peace, Angela said. It's where my soul feels recharged. Angela and her family relocated when she was in the Coast Guard to Alaska on Christmas Day in 2005 after joining the Coast Guard's Arctic Planning and Operations Team, which they do a great job. By the way, the Coast Guard in Alaska has now been renamed the Arctic sector for the Coast Guard. She fell in love with Alaska immediately, especially as she felt her work was making a real impact on these Arctic missions in rural communities where our Coast Guard plays such an important role. She said, quote, "Seeing firsthand how critical the Coast Guard is to rural Alaska deepened my commitment to this mission of the Coast Guard and inspired me to continue supporting Coast Guard Arctic operations wherever possible." For more than a decade, Angela worked in the Arctic operations of the Coast Guard, first stationed in Juneau and then in Anchorage, and was on active duty orders when, unfortunately, her life suddenly was upended in February of 2022. So what happened during that unfortunate time? She was returning books to the Anchorage Library when she was attacked in a random assault by a mentally ill man that unfortunately left her with a severe spinal cord injury. She spent more than a month in the hospital and even longer in physical therapy, adjusting to this difficult life in a wheelchair. Angela said that she felt like everything was a fight. She pushed herself mentally and physically to heal from the attack while spending hours on the phone, unfortunately, with her insurance company. And to make matters worse, the charges against her attacker were dropped after he was found to be incompetent to stand trial, even after it came out that this man had attacked other women before. So this is a giant change, a very difficult change in the life of Angela, and let's face it, other people would have just given up. She didn't give up at all. She was on a mission, Mr. President. First, she decided to make sure that this kind of injustice wouldn't happen again. Angela reached out to Alaska lawmakers to share her story and push for change, to make sure attackers couldn't just get away with hurting people, even if they were, quote, incompetent to stand trial. So after more of a year of work and advocacy, she got our Alaska legislature to pass a bill ensuring that dangerous individuals who are incompetent to stand trial will be held and evaluated for involuntary commitment. That's right. Great job, Angela. Victims of crime in Alaska now have the right to attend the involuntary commitment hearings for those who attack them. Makes sense. She got it done. And they have the right to know the status of those involuntary commitment proceedings. This guy should have been put away and not attacking more women in Alaska. Angela said, quote, "Advocacy requires more than just passion. It demands endurance, community, and the courage to admit when the weight is too heavy to carry alone. That's when others come and help you." Amidst the battle to pass her legislation and recover physically, Angela discovered another passion which she excelled at: competitive sports. Nearly 2 years after her attack in 2024, she attended her first adaptive sports training camp in California. And here, Angela's life turned. Think about this. She's now in a wheelchair. One sport stood out, wheelchair rugby. She said, quote, "Wheelchair rugby lights a fire in me like nothing else. It's absolutely electric." It was wheelchair rugby's team element that really drew her to the sport. She said, "What has truly moved the needle in my healing has been the community I've found within adaptive sports. This community has helped me build and rebuild parts of me I wasn't sure could ever be whole again." Now, Mr. President, it wasn't just wheelchair rugby. Angela excelled in every sport that she has focused on, in so many other sports. It's incredible, to be honest. Let me go through the list. In the 2024 Department of Defense Warrior Games, she brought home gold medals in both the 4-minute and 1-minute indoor rowing events. In the 2025 Invictus Games, she brought home a gold medal in the 50-meter backstroke and in bronze downhill skiing. Skiing, rugby, rowing. Her greatest achievement at these games wasn't the medals, however. It was being honored by her teammates as one of 2 on the team chosen to carry the United States flag at the opening ceremonies. It's great. What a patriot. What a patriot. So let me conclude, Mr. President. Angela's still doing so much, and my goodness, her family's contributing to our country in a way that's really remarkable. This February, Angela retired from the Coast Guard as an honorary Chief Petty Officer. But her legacy in the U.S. military, particularly the sea services, continues. Her oldest daughter, Kiana, is a hospital corpsman 2nd class in the Navy and was honored as Alaska's Armed Services YMCA Reservist of the Year in 2023. Middle daughter, Ariana, has served in the U.S. Navy since 2022. And her youngest daughter, Liliana, just graduated from basic training in the Coast Guard and is now being trained as a hospital corpsman at the A School. 3 daughters, 3 service members, U.S. Navy, U.S. Coast Guard, just like their heroic mom. All 3 daughters are now following in their mom's footsteps. No wonder their mom has got to be one of the best role models any young woman could hope for. Our military serves as a reminder of our strength as a country. And Mr. President, no one personifies that better than Angela Harris. Angela, your courage and strength, your incredible athleticism, your advocacy on victims' issues, all of this is unparalleled. Thank you for everything you've done for protecting Alaskans, our coasts, future potential victims of crime, taking care of those great daughters, protecting our people, and most of all, congratulations on being our Alaskan of the Week. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
To recognize the senator from Oklahoma.
is the Senate currently in a quorum call?
It is not.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, when my girls were little, and they're not little anymore, they're adults now. When they were little, I can remember at times I'd be working from the house in our little office space in the house, and one of the girls would crawl up in my lap, and she would look at me while I'm working on a computer, and she would say the same thing every time. "What you doing?" Every time. "What you doing?" I think about that when I think about the last 7 months here in the Senate. I have folks at home that'll look at the United States Senate and said, "What have you been doing for a while? What's that? What you doing?" What's been good is to be able to answer the question a lot. This has been the most productive beginning point for a new president in the first 7 months of a Senate in decades. Let me just walk through just a little bit of what we've been doing. We began this year by passing the Lake and Riley Act, which requires ICE to start arresting illegal migrants who have committed crimes. Amazingly enough, that wasn't a requirement before. We fixed that. We passed and made law the Take It Down Act. This is about revenge porn that we're seeing that has affected so many young lives, that they're posting their images and sometimes using AI to destroy the lives of people they either hate, use to date, or whatever it may be. We now passed that and made that federal law to be able to protect the youngest generation from that kind of vulnerability. We passed the Halt Fentanyl Act, permanently classifying fentanyl-related substances as Schedule I drugs. Amazingly, we had to do that year after year. It was always a challenge. We started dealing with fentanyl in the serious manner that it needs to be dealt with. We passed that and made that law. We passed the Genius Act, which puts the United States on the forefront of digital currency. This is not cryptocurrency. This is dealing with stablecoin. It's similar to a traveler's check, only in a digital form, to say dollar for dollar. This creates new competition for credit cards and online shopping. It creates a way to be able to do this, to be able to put the United States and American currency in the lead on the digital world while still protecting physical currency and guaranteeing physical American currency continues to exist. Just those alone would be significant to be able to begin out a session, but we're not close to being done. The Senate has held more than 440 votes just this year so far. That is more than most years of the Senate in total in the last 30 years. We've done just in the first 6 months. That's more votes at the beginning of any session since the Reagan administration. We began with 10 straight weeks, day after day after day, of just pounding away to be able to get stuff done. We've worked on nominations, as this body is still working on confirmations even right now. We've confirmed so far 119 of President Trump's nominees. To compare that to this same spot 8 years ago in the first term of the first Trump presidency, they had 56 that were done at this point. We've now done 119. We've done twice as many confirmations now as what we did under the first Trump administration, but we still have quite a few to go. This has been, though, we can do this the easy way or the hard way, for the past 7 months. You see, confirmations typically are done by voice vote here in the United States Senate because we have work to do on legislative work as well. Unlike the House, we do personnel and we do policy. We have to switch back and forth between the two often, but every time you're working on the personnel side, the confirmation side, every single nomination takes about 3 hours, both to file on them, to be able to go through the whole period. There's also a day of waiting for those. But those are typically done just for the high-profile nominees. They're not typically done for every nominee. There's about 1,200 people that have to be confirmed. So typically things are done by voice vote. Under President George W. Bush, 90% of his nominees were actually done by voice vote in the Senate. Under President Obama, 90% of those were done by voice vote. Under the first President Trump, 67% of his nominees were done by voice vote. So far in this Senate, zero. Zero. Every single nominee, even if it was the protocol officer for the State Department, or a legislative affairs person in an agency, or the deputy secretary assistant of something, literally that no American other than their family knows who they are, they've had to go through the full 3-hour process, the intervening day, to slow this down. That has not happened to any president ever in the history of the country, ever. No president has ever faced this kind of obstruction, ever, for their nominees. We've still done 119 of those by staying and working at night, by staying and working on weekends. We'll continue to be able to do this the hard way or the easy way, but quite frankly, President Trump should have the same respect of every other president in American history. They should be able to get to their staff. So we'll continue on this process. As we already have, we'll just keep moving through the process, because what we're doing is trying to get the work done for the United States Senate. We've taken on some issues that haven't been taken on in a long time. We did a rescissions package, not been done in 35 years. We not only talked about it, we passed it, we made it law. We as this body examined some areas that we said, this seems like wasteful spending to me, we shouldn't do it, literally voted, took it out, and saved the American taxpayers $9 billion from this year's budget. That's not happened in 35 years to be able to do that. How did we do that? Well, we identified some areas of waste in foreign aid and said, do we really need to have this as a top priority? We took away the funding that was used last year to create environmentally friendly reproductive health decision education for children in foreign countries. We took away the funding for the Iraqi Sesame Street and for the Malaysian Youth Climate Corps. We took away the funding that created the grant for vegan food in Zambia. We took away the funding for the Pride Festival in Southern Africa. We took away the funding for social media mentorships in Serbia and Belarus. We took away the funding for gender diversity for the Mexican street lighting industry. And we took away $1 billion of funding from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting that many people said, oh gosh, this is going to lead to the end of NPR and PBS, and it absolutely is not. Because NPR, 90% of it is funded by corporate and private funding already. This was the last 10%. Literally, this was something that was attempted to be done in 1983 under the Reagan administration to say, why do we have federally taxpayer-paid journalists? Why don't we have that in the free market? If it made sense in 1983, it certainly makes sense now. In 1983, there were about 4 channels. Now there are thousands. So what Reagan couldn't get done, we just got done. That's a pretty productive Senate, but we're not close to being done with the things that have already been accomplished just in the last 7 months. The One Big Beautiful Bill has been an interesting, big, beautiful conversation. The One Big Beautiful conversation is about what all is in it. Well, it's been public for a long time. The House passed it, and it was over 2 months before the Senate was able to take it up. And even when we took it up in the Senate, we brought it out committee by committee so everybody could see it, read it, review it. It was 940 pages, but it was very public for weeks. We wanted everyone to be able to see what's in it. But quite frankly, there was so much that got done in that bill that people are still digging through it and going, oh, I didn't know that happened. It's been interesting the number of people that I run into that say, I'm finding out more about the bill, and the more I find out about it, the more I'm grateful for its passage. It's been really encouraging when I get back home on weekends to be able to chat with folks. My favorite so far was when my wife and I had dropped by a Dollar Tree store, and I'm there at the cash register, and there's a very nice lady who looked like she was in her mid-70s, and we were chit-chatting, and she said to me, I saw you on the news explaining the bill. I've looked at it even more, and I am so grateful because as a working senior, I'm going to get a big benefit for my taxes, and I need the help. And then she smiled at me and she said, you put some new work requirements into that bill. Thank you, because everybody needs to work like I do. It's a great conversation, actually, to be able to chat with her and to be able to hear that she gets it. This bill and the things that we're able to work in, we did a lot of things that we've tried to do for a long time we were able to get done. One of the things that I worked on a lot was the issue of what's called full expensing. This is used by a lot of manufacturers and a lot of small businesses. You see, when they buy a big piece of equipment, they're allowed to be able to write off the expense over several years. Well, that works for their taxes except for the first year often, and it's a killer for them. Because when they get a big new piece of equipment, they often have to borrow money to pay their taxes that year, because they can't afford to get both a new piece of equipment and still pay their taxes and the other expenses. So they either don't get the new equipment or they have to delay to do it. What does that do? That decreases productivity. It makes no difference to the federal income in the Treasury to say you get to write it off in 1 year or you get to write it off in several years, but it makes a huge difference to that small business or that manufacturer to say the year you have the big expense is also the year you get to write it off. We got that done. And not only did we get that done, we made that permanent tax policy to say it is just the right thing to be able to do, to say when a business has a major expense, they get to write that expense off in the year that it happens like every other expense. For years, I've worked on an issue about charitable giving. The top 9% of Americans can write off their charitable giving. Everyone else cannot. I think that's wrong. I've always thought that was wrong. We were able to put in this year into the One Big Beautiful Bill, a bill that I had to be able to make sure that if you give to a nonprofit, you're able to write that expense off completely. You're able to write that off and to say this expense up to $2,000 is a deduction on their taxes. That's helpful to every single nonprofit. That's helpful to every single taxpayer that actually gives to nonprofits or their church, whatever charity. It makes a big difference to be able to do that. We didn't just talk about that, we actually got that done. The no tax on Social Security for seniors, I've already talked about. The tax credit for businesses that create a child care facility on site to encourage more child care facilities and to be able to do it closer to the workplace. That's very beneficial for their families. Extending the paid family medical leave, that's something we were able to get done, not just talk about, we were able to get done. My Democratic colleagues and President Biden created a new requirement that if you have more than $600 that you do on Venmo or PayPal, you have to have a whole new reporting system in the IRS. Well, it drove Americans crazy to say, what in the world? Why do I have to do that new reporting system? For many families, that's how they'll reimburse their kids or another family member for a purchase or whatever it may be. But if you exceed $600, you're going to have to now do a new IRS reporting for it. You know what we got done this year? We killed that and said that's ridiculous. People shouldn't have to be able to report all that, what's actually happening in their Venmo and PayPal back and forth with their family members. That's not something that the IRS needs to be able to track. For family farms, we're able to do a significant amount of the Farm Bill already. A change in reference prices and a lot of the different programs that were desperately in need of an upgrade. We didn't just talk about that as we have for several years. We actually got that done. We also fixed the death tax. That's something that was about to expire, and a lot of folks on family farms, they may be liquidity poor, but they're asset rich. They've got land, they've got tractors, and the fear is always for their family, when the family passes away, that the kids are going to have to sell the farm just to be able to pay the taxes. Well, you know what? We fixed that for family farms and finally got that done. This has been an incredibly busy season. We improved and modernized air traffic control. We not only talked about that, we got that finished to allow additional funding to be able to modernize that system, which people all over the country have looked for. We're modernizing our Navy. We finally got the opportunity to be able to modernize our Coast Guard, which has been in desperate need literally for decades for improvement along our ports. We were able to make changes on our southern border. Now, I've passed on several different bills that I've actually filed that we're working through the process on to be able to do more inspections southbound, more inspections northbound. But in the meantime, we were able to add new border walls. We were able to add new border patrol agents, new ICE agents, new detention facilities. We've not just talked about those things, we've actually passed it and made it law. Those things are done. It's been an incredibly busy season. When I was in May at the Otay Mesa Port of Entry in California, right along the border with Mexico, it's one of the busiest ports in the world. I could see the infrastructure problems that were there. When I visited with the Coast Guard when I was there off the coast, I talked to them about the challenges that they have with the land port of entry being so closed now and so few people, thankfully, even trying to cross our southern land borders. Now literally people are getting on jet skis in Baja California and trying to head out to the ocean to try to land in San Diego, and our Coast Guard is the one that's interdicting that. So I was able to work through a process this year to be able to upgrade the radar system, the camera systems, all the things they desperately need for the Coast Guard. We didn't just talk about that this year. When I came back in May, we worked on the process and actually got that done, got that passed into law. That's funded, and now that technology is being added that is desperately needed to be able to secure our southern border. Those are the things that need to get done, that is getting done this year. I'm grateful to be able to see the things that we've been able to work through the process on. We still have multiple things to do, but we have multiple things in process. For instance, I've worked on cell phone jamming reform issues for years in our prisons. Tom Cotton and I have partnered together on this to be able to find a way to be able to block those illegal cell phones in our federal and state prisons and our local county jails that are smuggled in, that are used to be able to literally stalk victims outside of the prison. That's got to stop. We're working through the process to be able to make sure that's available, because we want to make sure that we can actually put an end to that. I've introduced an act, Protecting Children Over Profits is what it's called. This deals with tech companies that when law enforcement has to do a subpoena, when there's child abuse or child pornography on their site, those tech companies that by their rules are not supposed to have that at all, those tech companies then charge local law enforcement to be able to do the search for it. That's got to end. They know they're just creating a disincentive to local law enforcement to even follow up on that. It's not supposed to be there at all. So we're finding a way to be able to get rid of that. Something else that really has come up that dealt with our rural nursing homes. For our rural nursing homes, they've had a real challenge because the Biden administration put in a new rule that had new requirements for additional nurses and personnel. That all sounds really good, but in most rural nursing homes, they flat out don't have the people to be able to do it. So that was leading to the closing of rural nursing homes. We were able to reverse that and to be able to say that should not be that way. Allow the rural nursing homes to be able to handle their staffing and to be able to stay in business. The last thing we want is the closure of rural nursing homes and that people to get nursing care have to travel 50, 100 miles to be able to get to it. That means their family can't connect with them. We didn't just talk about that. We were able to get that done. This year, it's been fun working on a lot of specific Oklahoma projects. Anyone that's in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that drives down I-44 right now will often drive down and see these bridge supports that those of us around Tulsa affectionately call Tulsa Stonehenge. It's been up for quite a while, those bridge supports, but no bridge is actually on top of them, and it does look like a modern Stonehenge. You know what? We were able to secure the funding to actually get that finished. So we don't just have bridge supports up in one of the busiest intersections in all of Oklahoma. We're able to get that intersection done. If you're in southern Oklahoma, you know the Roosevelt Bridge, and if you ever traveled across it, you have white knuckles. A bridge that's named the Roosevelt Bridge because it was built during the Roosevelt administration. That bridge is still one of the most important bridges in southern Oklahoma, crossing over Lake Texoma, school buses and semis and families that are coming back and forth on vacation, the folks coming back and forth to work, literally have a high-risk encounter every time they cross that bridge. We were able to get the funding secured for that to finally start the process of replacing that bridge. It's in desperate need to actually get done. We were able to get so many things done this year, and we're halfway through the year. One quick story, Mr. President. I'm so incredibly proud of a lot of our caseworkers that are back home. We focus on the needs and the constituents in Oklahoma. The field staff that we have traveling around the state do a remarkable job helping people problem solve. But I have to highlight one quick story. We had a veteran that was 106 years old. He was a World War II veteran. He was in Edmond, Oklahoma. He had actually never received his medals after he served in World War II. Never. His family had thought about it, and he had thought about it for a long time. But the records were long gone. So my team jumped on it. We did the research, worked with the United States Army, able to track down some very old World War II records, and were able to get to Mr. McGregor his medals. And it made it even more fun because we were able to deliver them to him just over a month ago on Father's Day weekend, when his whole family was able to come in and was able to stand there with him as he, that World War II veteran, finally received the medals and the gratitude from a grateful nation. It's an honor to be able to work on so many tax policy issues and other things, but it's an absolute privilege to be able to honor people worthy of honor. And there's a bunch of great Oklahomans like that. We have more to do, and we'll keep going on this, but it's been a great start to a year, but we're just getting started. With that, I yield the floor.
To recognize the senator from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as ranking member of the Senate Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee, I rise today to oppose the nomination of Casey Mulligan to be Chief Counsel for Advocacy at the Small Business Administration. On April 2nd, the committee reported out the Mulligan nomination by a vote of 10-9. Not one Democrat voted in support. Dr. Mulligan represents yet another radical departure from the norms we should expect from government, courtesy of the Trump administration. The Office of Advocacy was created to serve as an independent voice for small businesses. It is charged by statute with examining how executive actions affect small businesses. However, Dr. Mulligan, an economist at the University of Chicago, subscribes to an ultra-conservative school of thought that opposes regulation in almost any form. Dr. Mulligan actually rejects regulations that protect the environment, safeguard fair treatment of workers, and keeps products from injuring consumers. He has a decades-long track record of questioning basic protections that most Americans take for granted. He has cast doubt on the need for a mandatory minimum wage. He called into question paid sick leave and unemployment insurance. He vigorously opposes Obamacare, and even went so far as to make the absurd argument that Obamacare was responsible for making the Great Recession even worse. This is the leadership that President Trump envisions for the independent Office of Advocacy. But this office is just too important to entrust to someone like Dr. Mulligan. As I stand here, countless small businesses across the nation are facing the threat of closure because of President Trump's destructive trade war. And yet, since coming under the control of this administration, the Office of Advocacy's Trump-appointed interim leadership has not yet held a single roundtable about tariffs, or even, as far as anyone can tell, published a single word about how tariffs might be harming small businesses across our nation. We have 33 million small businesses in America. You would think that would be something that the Small Business Administration would be thinking about. How is it that an office whose sole purpose is to call attention to how small businesses are affected by administration policy has failed to mention tariffs even once? Are they talking to small businesses, or are they looking over their shoulders and saying, no, we're just going to remain silent about the obvious, worried that anything that runs counter to the Trump administration's policy will lead to their dismissal? That's my concern, and that should be America's concern. If the interim leadership at the Office of Advocacy is too scared to raise the obvious point that small businesses are being crushed by the Trump tariffs, we can only imagine what the president's hand-picked nominee will do if he is confirmed. The Office of Advocacy needs strong, independent leadership that can stand up to the administration when small businesses are under threat. I urge my colleagues to vote no on this nomination so that our nation's 34 million small business owners have a real advocate looking out for them and not just another Trump yes man. So at this point, Mr. President, I am going to doubt the presence of a quorum.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Mr. President,
Chair recognizes the senator from Massachusetts.
are we in a quorum, Mr. President?
Yes, we are.
Could I ask for a vitiation of that quorum?
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President, very much. I want to start tonight by addressing those on my side of the aisle. My friends, I'm taking the floor with a simple message to you. Don't give up. We cannot give up. We can't afford to give up. The American people are demanding we don't give up. They're demanding we get up and we fight back. We have to fight back against the attacks on our health care system, against the attacks on families across our country, especially the poorest, on reproductive rights. We can't give up. On our neighbors seeking asylum or education through our country's lawful processes. We can't give up. On affordable energy that keeps the lights on, bills low, and our air clean, wind, solar, all-electric vehicles, battery storage technologies, the future. We can't give up. Republicans have taken a battering ram to the American health care system, a system that was already too expensive, too inaccessible, too complicated for too many Americans. And what have they done? They've passed legislation to slash $850 billion from Medicaid, $500 billion from Medicare, $300 billion from the Affordable Care Act. And they're slashing NIH research on Alzheimer's and cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, slashing the funding to find the cure to the diseases which run through every family in America. Just slashing it. Slashing the Centers for Disease Control. Slashing it. Just an absolute evisceration of the healthcare system in our country. And what are we going to see? According to Yale University, 51,000 additional deaths per year over the next 10 years. 500,000 people dying because of the cuts in those programs. 500,000 people dying. That's what the Republicans have done in their big, beautiful bill. People are going to die because of that. And how have they done it? Well, Trump and his backers have done this by breaking the basic functions of democracy, violating institutional norms, treating people's lives as expendable. He's done it through corruption, intimidation, illegal power grabs, and plain cruelty. Already, the Republicans cut $2.5 billion from the National Institutes of Health, $11.4 billion from the Centers for Disease Control, cut programming for mental health, environmental health, reproductive health. People are about to receive notices that their insurance costs are going up. They're going to be skyrocketing. Hospitals and Planned Parenthood clinics are already closing. Americans aren't experiencing this one at a time because it's happening all at once across our country. Republicans acted on Trump's big oil-funded vendetta against wind and solar energy by cutting incentives for the cleanest and the cheapest sources of electricity, all to pad the pockets of their fossil fuel friends. The oil, the gas, the coal industry. The companies that have created the climate crisis are the ones that have given hundreds of millions of dollars to Donald Trump for his election last year, and now they're collecting by promising to destroy wind and solar and all-electric vehicles and battery storage technologies, the competitors to the energy sources of the 20th century and the 19th century, destroying the future for young people who are looking to a clean energy future in the 21st century. And Trump's one big ugly bill eliminated the residential clean and efficient energy incentives. They ripped out the funding for heat pumps. They're pretty much pulling them out of the walls, pulling solar panels off of roofs. In other words, committing highway robbery on homeowners who want to lower their bills, breathe clean air, and ensure a livable future for their families. The big ugly bill is going to mean a lot of big ugly health care, big ugly higher energy bills arriving in the mail by the millions for families all across our country. Republicans are forcing us backwards. Republicans are looking at America in a rearview mirror, not straight ahead towards the future which we should have for every family, a cleaner, healthier, more fair, more safe future for everyone. No, that's not where they want to take us. And Democrats must stop the bleeding and fight hard for something better. And that means us. As part of that fight, we should not agree to a government funding deal that makes Americans' lives harder and more expensive. We can say loud and clear that we want to reverse Medicaid and affordable care cuts. No cuts for research into cancer and Alzheimer's and diabetes. No attacks on affordable, renewable energy. No cuts to affordable housing, to save public broadcasting, to protect public weather services, to save the EPA from being destroyed. The Republicans are turning EPA into every polluter's ally. It's an open door for the oil, gas, and coal and polluting industries all across our country over at the EPA right now. DOJ is just saying, welcome, tell us what other environmental protection you want us to take off of the books that have helped to increase life expectancy in our nation. And beyond our fights for programs that help working families, we should not agree to a government funding deal that doesn't stop the lawlessness of the Trump administration. The Trump administration must spend what Congress allocates. If Republicans won't say that out loud, that Donald Trump should follow the laws passed by this legislative body, what good are the funding laws that the House and Senate passed that are signed by the president? What's the whole point of having a House and Senate? If Donald Trump and Russell Vogt over at OMB says, we don't have to pay any attention. OMB is not written into the United States Constitution. There was no revolution to make sure that Russell Vogt at OMB gets to decide which programs get funded. When people were going down Mass Ave in Massachusetts, from Arlington to Lexington to Concord, they were saying no taxation without representation. We want a House. We want a Senate. We're going to have a revolution. We don't want a king. We want controls. We want safeguards. Because if we can pass a bill that funds programs that better the lives of Americans in every state, but Republicans refuse to commit that they won't then cut that same funding with a partisan vote later because Trump tells them to, what good are our funding laws? What was the whole point of bipartisanship in the first place? And even if Republicans say that they will keep the promise of that funding, how can we believe them? How can we buy their promises when they've broken them before over and over again? As recently as this month, they broke their promise. Republicans are the ones who started the government shutdown on January 22nd, the day of the first executive orders to cut funding across the government. We started this administration with Trump unilaterally and illegally withholding bipartisan past funding from whole departments like USAID to targeting individual recipients such as Harvard University in Massachusetts, cutting the funding at Harvard for cancer, for Alzheimer's, for diabetes, for Parkinson's, for the diseases which they were looking to find the cure for families. Republicans then unilaterally passed a continuing resolution last March because they and Trump refused to negotiate with Democrats. Republicans unilaterally passed a reconciliation bill to fund only their priorities, including lavish tax breaks for the wealthy huge increases to the Defense Department budget while gutting Medicaid and food assistance and Medicare and kicking 10 million Americans off of health care. 10 million Americans are going to lose their health care. Halting funding to clean up our air, causing energy bills to spike by attacking affordable, renewable energy. Republicans also raised the debt limit in that bill because they didn't want to negotiate with Democrats over that. Republicans unilaterally passed in the dark of night cuts to public broadcasting and global health just a couple of weeks ago, even though Congress had previously passed that funding on a bipartisan basis. Democrats, Republicans vote for it, goes down to the White House, president signs it, and the president says, oh, not binding on me. I can now do whatever I want. So everything that's taught the kids in the 6th grade about how our bills become law, that's just going into a shredder. That's just etch-a-sketched right out of history. The president wants to be a king. And that's where it all started 250 years ago, right along Massachusetts Avenue in Massachusetts. The redcoats are coming. King George wants to be controlling us without any representation from the people who are in the colonies. That's what we fought for right here. The whole revolution was fought to build this building so that there was representation. Republicans just don't care about it. And just this month, Trump's budget czar, Russell Vought, said he wanted the appropriations process to be less bipartisan. Less bipartisan. Remember when Trump said he didn't know anything about Project 2025? Remember when he said that? They asked him in September of 2024, what about Project 2025? Don't know anything about it, says Trump. In October, what about Project 2025? Don't know anything about it, he said. Well, Russell Vought is now the head of OMB. He wrote Project 2025. Trump gave the job to Russell Vought to then implement Project 2025. Would you all agree that the president had a very high prevarication coefficient as he was talking about his knowledge of Project 2025? Do you all agree he knew exactly what he was doing? He was just lying to the American people? I think so. The White House and Vought are saying they will use their own pocket rescissions, just another term for illegal impoundment of taxpayer money, to enact DOGE cuts in anything that Congress passes. So I'll quote Mark Twain to my Democratic colleagues. There is nothing to be learned from the second kick of a mule to your behind. Maya Angelou put it more nicely. When someone tells you who they are the first time, you should believe them. So Republicans are already plotting to eliminate the Department of Education through another partisan vote to steal taxpayer money for their own purposes. And I don't want to urge them to do the right thing, because I have no confidence and no evidence that they will do the right thing, regardless of our request that they remember the bipartisan spirit that has always defined the appropriations process. To quote the great comedian Oscar Levant, they'll double-cross that bridge when they come to it. That's who they are. They're double-crossers. And we can all see what happened in that rescission process, and we know they're planning more double-crossing coming right down the line. Republicans are asking us not to believe our own eyes that have seen them cut funding to our states and to programs that save lives in our country. They're asking us not to believe our own ears that have heard them say they're going to cut and they're going to withhold funding for our special needs students, for cancer research, for farmers. Republicans and Trump do not care about working with Democrats. When they say bipartisan process, what they really mean is we're going to do whatever we want to do. We're the Republicans. We're in charge of the whole country. We don't need to talk to anyone. And Democrats don't have many tools, being in the minority. But an important one is doing everything we can to slow down this Trump march to increase costs lost health care, and ultimately an economic catastrophe. So I've continued to vote against all Trump nominees because their only job is to execute Trump's illegal and unconstitutional agenda. I'm voting no. Those who have gotten bipartisan support have acted in their jobs just as partisan as the rest of them. Anyone who has stood up for independence and the rule of law, they've been fired by Trump. Just show that you have independence. Just show that you're going to stand up for the Constitution. Just raise a question. They fire you in the Trump administration. And what have Republicans done about it? Nothing. More nominations for more unqualified candidates. I wasn't aware that Donald Trump placed one of his tariffs on courage because we appear to be experiencing a Congress-wide shortage. And that is what is troubling, I think, to the American people, because that is what is going to cause the problems that are about to be seen across our nation. The Trump administration thinks Congress is irrelevant. And unfortunately, Republicans don't appear to have any interest in disabusing them of that notion. Just look at the Department of Energy. This month, the Department of Energy announced openly that it is ignoring the appropriations law on funding for wind and solar and all-electric vehicles, or as young people call it, the future. Only today, the Government Accountability Office said that the Department of Energy broke the law by failing to distribute funding for the Renew America's Schools program as directed by Congress. We have to ask ourselves, how is passing another appropriations law going to address that lawlessness? It's like the definition of insanity, doing the exact same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And it's not just about budgets. It's not just about dollars and cents. It's about common sense. That's what we're going to have to bring to this process. Because Trump and his henchmen have been on a deregulatory blitz. The latest, and perhaps the most egregious, is the Environmental Protection Agency's Administrator Lee Zeldin's announcement this week that the Trump administration is repealing the finding that climate change endangers our lives and health and safety. That's like a doctor repealing the finding that smoking causes lung cancer. But that's the head of the EPA under Donald Trump, working for the oil, gas, and coal industry. Or a firefighter repealing the finding that a lit match can burn down a house. That's the head of the EPA for Donald Trump. He says there is no such thing as climate change that needs any kind of action by the American people for the next generation of Americans to protect them. To you, all I can say is you can try to censor information. You can try to silence scientists, and they're firing them, the biologists and the chemists at the EPA by the hundreds. They're just firing all of these people who were summa cum laudes in college, all the kids that sat in the first row in your high school class, all those biologists and chemists, they're firing them all. They don't want to hear about climate change. They don't want to hear about the science. So you can try to bury the facts. You can try to bury the reality, but you can't change that. You can't change it. The endangerment finding is backed by science. The endangerment finding is backed by law. And it has withstood every single attempt to challenge it so far. And you're saying, what's the endangerment finding? Well, in Massachusetts versus EPA, a Supreme Court decision in 2007, the Supreme Court ruled that the EPA had to determine, does greenhouse gases in large amounts endanger the lives and well-being and welfare of citizens in the United States? And the EPA made that finding under Barack Obama, using science, saying, yes, that there is an endangerment. And that's the law that we've operated under for 15 years. That's why we have cleaner cars. That's why utilities don't send up as much pollution into the air, because of that finding. And that's why we've lowered the temperature, lowered the thermostat in the United States and across the planet. We've just reduced the temperature. Well, the endangerment finding gave the EPA the power to regulate planet-warming greenhouse gases as air pollution under the Clean Air Act because climate change threatens our welfare. And that authority came from the Supreme Court of the United States. And driven by the devastation that climate change wreaked on its citizens, Massachusetts sued the EPA for not regulating the gases that contribute to climate change. And Massachusetts won. The Supreme Court agreed that the EPA was obligated to safeguard people from the actual and imminent threat that greenhouse gases pose to people everywhere, and that's known as the endangerment finding. And nearly 2 decades later, that danger has only gotten worse, more intense, more acute, more personal for everyone in our country and around the world. And we have to be the leaders, not the laggards. You can't preach temperance from a bar stool. You can't tell the rest of the world to do something if you're not doing it. You can't tell someone not to drink a beer or have a cigar in their hand if you have a cigar in your hand and a beer in the other hand. No one's going to follow you. That's where Donald Trump has taken us now on climate change. That's where Lee Zeldin has taken us on climate change. He's given away the moral authority, the technological leadership that should be the United States of America. And I've breathed that dirty air from wildfire smoke. I've seen horrible floods steal the livelihoods of Massachusetts farmers, and warming waters wreck the fishing grounds off of our coast of Massachusetts. I've grieved with those who lost lives in hurricanes, those who were forced from their family homes thanks to rising tides. Look at those families and tell me that this isn't dangerous. Look at those young people who worry about their future and see every year hotter than the last. Every year is warmer than the preceding one. And that's because the oil, gas, and coal industry continue to send more and more of these greenhouse gases up into the atmosphere. Look at the families paying skyrocketing electric and home insurance bills, wondering how they're going to keep their kids safe in a crisis and keep food on the table. Tell me their welfare isn't hurt by the climate crisis. This endangerment finding keeps us safe. It says there is danger and something must be done about it, because you can't fix what you won't face. There's danger from sending all of those pollutants up into the atmosphere. And then, like the ceiling here, it's captured. And then the heat is held in. And the planet gets warmer and warmer. And the fires become hotter and hotter. And the floods get bigger and bigger. And the storms get more and more violent because we keep the heat in because of the greenhouse effect of all of those pollutants. And this administration just continues to bury its head in the sand and will bury Americans along with it. We're going to lose a lot of lives. Now, we've discovered a second endangerment finding. Lee Zeldin and Donald Trump are a clear and present danger to the welfare of our nation today. I think it's pretty clear to young people that they have made their own endangerment finding. They know that Donald Trump is a danger to them. They know Lee Zeldin at the EPA is a danger to them. And how did they justify this decision in the White House when all the science in the world is against them? The Trump administration found 5 crank, faux scientists and gave them a platform for lies and misinformation. And these known climate deniers argued our seas aren't rising more quickly, and that extreme heat caused by global warming can't affect our crops. And putting these 5 climate deniers in charge of a climate science report is like putting a vaccine denier in charge of the National Health Agency. Wait, I'm sorry. They did that as well. They did that as well. A vaccine denier running the Department of Health and Human Services. It's unbelievable. In an era where science should be venerated, in fact, it's just being disregarded across all of Trump's agencies. This report, put out by the Department of Energy, ignored the overwhelming scientific consensus and ongoing body of evidence that climate change puts us in danger, evidence that we are already bearing witness to. And you don't need to be a climate scientist to see that storms are becoming more furious, and more deadly. Just this month, we saw extreme weather take the lives of loved ones in Texas, in their flooding, in New Mexico. And those floods were supercharged by climate change. And that climate change was driven by the greed of the fossil fuel industry, by the oil, gas, and coal industries. This sham Department of Energy report is an attack on common sense, and it's an attack on public safety. Trump and Zeldin are arguing that American transportation emissions don't contribute to global climate change. EPA's own data shows that if our transportation sector was a country, it would be the 4th largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. They argue that sea levels aren't rising, that warming temperatures can't kill, that climate denial, it's gonna cost lives. They're just denying science. They're denying reality. They're denying what everyone sees 3 nights out of 7 on their television sets as the lead story of these wild storms, wildfires that affect all parts of our country. They're saying that warming temperatures can't kill. Well, again, climate denial costs lives. This is Trump's America, where EPA stands for every polluter's ally. Just revolving door. Come on in. Tell us what environmental regulation is making you less profitable, and we'll give you permission to ignore those environmental laws and send more pollution up into the air, create more cancers, more asthmas, more disease in children and pregnant women. We'll just give you the permission slip to go and do it. Because where your health is sacrificed for their wealth, Trump and Zeldin and their whole cabal of polluters should be ashamed, and they should be held accountable. From day one, Trump has had it out for any technology that might save money for working Americans, usually for reasons that range from the personal, like his problems with water-efficient toilets, to the personally enriching for Donald Trump. Look at wind power. Trump's crusade against wind power dates to 2006, when he bought an 1,800-acre estate in Scotland near a planned wind farm that he warned would be, quote, really ugly. You know, he just wants better views for the golf courses for which he's willing to violate our ethics laws. And look at his fossil fuel donors. In April of 2024, Trump demanded $1 billion in campaign donations from the fossil fuel industry at Mar-a-Lago. Give me $1 billion, he said, and I will take care of all those environmental problems for you. And the fossil fuel industry, they've been cashing it in for favors ever since. In the first 2 weeks alone, in the Trump administration, Trump's top 15 fossil fuel billionaire donors, otherwise known as the oilgarchy, increased their wealth by a collective $2.4 billion. In the big ugly bill, mom and pop taxpayers were forced to give $18 billion in handouts to big oil and big gas. That's the one big beautiful bill that the Republicans brag about. Do they brag about the $18 billion they gave to the oil, gas, and coal industry? You're not going to hear that when you hear the litany of the things that they were concerned about. And that's on top of the $35 billion the fossil fuel industry already gets in tax breaks and has gotten for decades and decades and decades and decades. You know what drives them crazy? When we give tax breaks for wind and solar, all electric vehicles, battery storage technologies. That's what drives them crazy. When the competition can finally get up and compete. That's what Donald Trump is doing in return for the funding from the oil, gas, and coal industry. He's just unleveling the playing field so that the fossil fuel industry, as they were in the 19th and 20th century, can dominate in the 21st century, regardless of the environmental impact, the health impacts on the American people. The result of Trump's showboating on trade, besides higher costs for American families, Trump said the European Union would buy $750 billion of energy resources from the United States over the next 3 years. You heard him say that just last week. This is more than pay to play. It's paid to slay our chance at a livable future, our clean air, our clean water, our affordable energy bills. The one big, beautiful bill, a tax on clean and cheap energy, just absolutely are ahistorical. In the one big, ugly bill, Republicans took aim at the cheapest form of energy out there, renewable energy. It's cheaper than oil and gas and coal. And they hate that now. It's a young person's vision for the future. Their legislation essentially puts a new tax on cheap, clean power, raising costs for ratepayers everywhere as projects to install new generation slow to a crawl, which is deeply ironic given that nearly 80% of clean energy investments from the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 that they sought to destroy have gone to Republican districts, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs in red districts across this country. Think about that. Trump is actively working to destroy economic growth and jobs in the very places that got him elected. More demand, less supply. More cost, less relief. Bills going up by more than $100 a year per family. We're already seeing energy costs start to spike, rising nearly 3 times higher this year than during Biden's term and rising 3 times as fast as general inflation. This is a predictor of coming atrocities due to the big, beautiful bill. Electricity rates are spiking across our country. People are seeing it in their bills on their kitchen tables. Energy is getting more expensive more quickly for every family across our country, and that's all thanks to the Republicans' big, ugly bill. But that's not all. The big, ugly bill will increase emissions equivalent to putting 72 million new cars on the road and eliminates pollution reduction programs leading to approximately hundreds of additional premature deaths in our country every single year. This means more asthma, more heart attacks, more families losing loved ones, all because Republicans wanted to give billionaire polluters another bonus. Kill the new industries, Trump says. Big oil says. Kill those new industries. And they did it. Undermining clean energy means all of us breathe dirtier air, costing Americans in expensive trips to the emergency room for asthma attacks, lost school days, lost work days. Asthma is already responsible for nearly 1.8 million emergency department visits, over 94,000 hospitalizations, more than 3,500 deaths annually. And what the Republicans have done in cooperation with Donald Trump is it's supercharging asthmas, visits to emergency rooms in our country. Cutting clean energy is making all of those health benefits go away. And the economic burden of asthma is staggering. Let me give you the numbers. It costs our healthcare system approximately $50 billion each year, almost $3 billion in lost school and work days, and $29 billion from mortality. The cumulative impact of breathing dirty air from living near a highway or a power plant means your risk of lung cancer skyrockets. Nearly $24 billion was spent on lung cancer in 2020, and it costs each patient $200,000 on average. But wait, there's more. At the same time that the bill slashes Medicaid and slashes the Affordable Care Act, as it pays out to dirty, expensive energy that pollutes your lungs, it also cuts billions in historic investments from the Inflation Reduction Act in environmental justice and air pollution reduction programs, even at schools. This included the $20 billion climate bank that I secured with Chris Van Hollen in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is projected to spur more than $250 billion in public and private sector investment to create jobs, lower Americans' energy costs, strengthen our energy independence, combat the climate crisis, deploy solar, deploy charging stations for electric vehicles. That was the climate bank, which I was able to create with Chris Van Hollen. They want to eliminate that. They've taken it to court. It was working too successfully. Anything that's working to deploy clean energy technologies, they hate. Republicans also targeted clean car regulations that save drivers money at the pump. Instead of the dawn of the clean energy future, Republicans are sunsetting incentives that would spur clean domestic manufacturing for industries. This bill is on track to destroy more than 840,000 American jobs by 2030 in the clean energy sector. This is the largest job-destroying bill to ever pass Congress. Killed 840,000 new jobs. Never before has Congress done anything like this, deliberately, intentionally killing all of those jobs. And that means fewer manufacturing, solar installation, home efficiency contracts all across our country. States with the largest job losses, Texas, Florida, Indiana, Georgia, they voted to destroy the jobs in their own states. They were going to be the center of this revolution. That's where the manufacturing plants were. But the oil, gas, and coal industry, they said to Donald Trump, kill it. And each of them received, as it said in Godfather Part 1, they each got an offer they couldn't refuse. And so as a result, they voted to kill all of that job creation. This isn't a red state or a blue state issue. This is creating a national economic crisis. The states with the highest spikes in energy prices, South Carolina, Kentucky, Oklahoma, Mississippi, and Louisiana, their prices are spiking right now and have been, and are going to continue to spike because of this bill. This administration has made it trade-off clear. Your future for their profit. That's Trump's art of the deal. You give up your future, and we get to make billions. So this is absolutely something that young people in our country, the next generation, they're going to be devastated by these decisions. And it's going to unfold next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. They're going to be looking back saying, what did that generation think? How could that Congress have killed wind and solar and all-electric vehicles? Because the Republican bill is going to make the United States a laggard, not a leader in innovation. Already, China is investing 4 times more than the United States in renewable energy. Instead of catching up and overtaking China, this bill will cede more jobs and progress to China. In fact, in 2024, China installed 357,000 megawatts of wind and solar. That's roughly the amount of wind and solar that the United States has installed in our country's entire history. China did it last year. You would think we want to take them on. You would think that's a challenge to the United States and our innovation, our entrepreneurial spirit. And instead, Donald Trump said to the Republicans, let's just surrender. Let's give up. Let's not compete in the energy sectors of the future. Let's let the Chinese sell the electric vehicles to the world. Let's let them sell the solar panels, the electric, the batteries, the wind technologies to the world. We're not going to do it. And by the way, he did the same thing with the biotech sector. When you slash the NIH budget, China is saying, thank you. We didn't like the fact that the United States was ahead of us. We don't know what we deserve to get this gift from Trump, but thank you for giving us the clean energy and biotech future for the 21st century, and asking for nothing in return. That's what Trump just did. That's what the Republicans are doing out here. Between January and May of 2025 alone, China added 198,000 megawatts of solar and 46,000 megawatts of wind. China now has more than 1 million megawatts of solar energy on the grid. China also produces 80% of the world's solar panels. Do you want to compete with the Chinese? No, says Trump. I don't want to compete. I don't like solar. I don't like wind. I don't like batteries. I don't like all-electric vehicles. I don't want to compete. America, we're 5% of the world. Let's just control the 5% of the world that is the population of the United States. Let the Chinese have the other 95% of the world for the clean energy future for the 21st century. That's the decision the president made, and the Republicans went along with it just this month. By contrast, the United States has approximately 1,200 gigawatts of utility-scale power on our grid. The United States added only 50,000 megawatts of solar and 4,000 megawatts of wind throughout the entirety of 2024. Not too shabby, but only a fraction of what China was able to accomplish. China sold over 11 million electric vehicles in 2024. China continues to be the world's EV manufacturing hub and is responsible for more than 70% of global production of electric vehicles. The United States remained a net importer of electric cars, with imports increasing by nearly 40% in 2024. How are we going to catch up if Republicans would rather hamstring the industry? We're not close to winning this race. The Republicans won't let us even get to the starting line. In fact, they don't even know where the ball game is. They're still driving around trying to find out where this game is. It's as though they don't understand that the Chinese are targeting our key industries, biotech, clean energy. And instead of responding with a plan, and we can beat China with a plan, you can't beat them without a plan. And what they did, the Republicans, in unison with Donald Trump, with J.D. Vance breaking the tie, the Vice President of the United States came here to cast the vote that said, we're giving up on biotech, we're giving up on clean tech, we're just going to let the Chinese have it. Just absolutely insane economically. So since the start of the Trump administration through April 2025, the Trump administration has already cost America more than 62,000 clean energy jobs, over $14 billion in private sector clean energy projects. And these vanishing projects were winners for the grid, for your wallets, for our economy. In 2024, 94% of all new electricity generation added was from wind and solar and batteries. That's 50,000 megawatts of solar, 4,000 megawatts of wind, 11,000 megawatts of batteries. So think of it this way. If you're the oil, gas, and coal industry, you're looking at 2024, and you're seeing 94% of all new electricity being wind and solar and batteries. It's driving them crazy, because this year would be 94%, and next year would be 94%, and the year after, and the year after, and natural gas would slowly but surely just recede into the rearview mirror of American history, and the coal industry would join them. So they hate it. They had to kill it. They had to kill the revolution that they said was never going to be competitive. And when it became competitive, they said, now we're going to kill it. Utility-scale solar, onshore wind are the cheapest energy technologies to operate and quickest to build, even without subsidies. Solar panels today cost 1% of what they cost 30 years ago. Can I say that? Solar right now costs only 1% of what it did 30 years ago. And these cheap, clean megawatts of power are powering our economy in red and blue states, and compare these with the fuels of the past. Last year, only 2,500 megawatts of natural gas were added and 0 from coal. That is a losing streak, if I ever saw one. Trump and Republicans like to characterize Democrats' interest in addressing climate change as quasi-religious. Well, here's the real gospel. Clean energy is not polarizing. It's popular in the polls. 70% of registered voters support the IRA, with over 70% of registered voters saying the U.S. needs to use more renewable energy than it does today. That's not religion. That is stimulus in solar panels. That's why Republicans are using every trick up their sleeve to rig the game while eliminating programs and incentives that lower energy costs and reduce pollution. An energy demand that is increasing, driven by power-hungry AI data centers and natural gas exports out of our country, Republicans are choosing to strangle America's supply of cheap solar and wind. And thanks to Republicans and their big ugly bill, wind deployment is expected to drop from 200,000 megawatts and solar by 150,000 megawatts by the year 2035, compared to prior estimates before they passed their bill. It's absolutely unbelievable. The stuff that was working and cheapest and cleanest, they're destroying. The stuff that's dirtiest and more expensive, they're giving tax breaks to. It's the opposite of what the rest of the world wants. And China knows it. They're going to be selling the solar panels, the all-electric vehicles, the batteries, the wind, to the rest of the world, 95% of the population. And we're pulling out of that competition. This is economics 101. High demand plus low supply means higher energy prices for everyone, forcing families to pay at least $130 more per month on their energy bills in 5 years and $170 more per month in 10 years. It goes even beyond the big ugly bill. We're living in their big ugly world. Earlier this month, the Department of Interior released a memo stating that all decisions related to wind and solar energy projects on federal lands now requires the Secretary of Interior, Doug Burgum's personal sign-off. Who's Secretary of Interior, Doug Burgum? He was a fossil fuel guy. Now you got to go to the fossil fuel guy to get permission to deploy wind and solar. A few weeks later, the Trump administration came out with new measures to further sabotage wind. And the staff at the Department of Energy are now full-time coal lobbyists. Can I say that again? The staff at the Department of Energy are full-time coal lobbyists who've been brought in. Coal, yeah, the dirtiest source out there, both a major contributor to the climate crisis and to the public health threat for communities nearby. That's who's running the Department of Energy. Just like Trump, coal is outdated, costly, dangerous. Perhaps it's no surprise that he's in a weird love affair with coal. Just weird that he loves this technology from 100 years ago. He just can't move to the future. Coal has shrunk from nearly half the country's electricity generation in 2008 to only 15% at the start of this year, a trend driven primarily by competition from cheaper fossil gas and renewables. Building new solar, even solar plus storage, is now cheaper than running existing coal plants in the United States. It's already winning. From today's Twitter post of coal captioned, quote, "She is the moment." A type of coal, mind you, that has not been mined in the U.S. for more than 80 years, to spreading misinformation that coal is critical to modern technology. Some of the coal love affair has just been plain weird. But more concerningly, they're actively spending your ratepayer dollars to keep retiring coal plants online. When Trump's sham energy emergency executive order, he's enabled the Department of Energy to use emergency authority to keep coal online, forcing working families to pay more in order to line the pockets of those big oil billionaires. That is not an energy emergency. This is a Trump energy tax on the American public. It's a deliberate strategy to make sure working families stay dependent on a damaging fuel source that makes a handful of billionaires richer by the day while everyone else pays the price in higher bills and the deterioration of their health. The truth is that Trump's gutting of cheap and reliable wind and solar has created the reliability risks to our grid, in addition to the rapid proliferation, massive load-sucking data centers. AI is incredibly energy intensive. One ChatGPT search uses 10 times the amount of power needed for a Google search. It took the energy consumption of 28,000 households to train ChatGPT-4. Data centers are expected to demand up to 130 gigawatts of electricity load by the end of this decade, equivalent to the electricity used by about 100 million United States homes. This will require adding 10 to 20 additional gigawatts per year to the electricity grid. Data centers are expected to demand
Senator's time
up to...
has expired. Do you need a moment to wrap up?
I thank you, Madam President, and I will conclude. And I will be back because this subject is just too important. We are now in a climate crisis. It's only going to worsen. NOAA is predicting higher than normal hurricanes coming our way. They're going to be supercharged. The planet is running a fever, and there are no emergency rooms for planets. We have to engage in preventative care. The Republicans have removed that care. And so we have to have this debate, this discussion. And I thank my colleagues, but especially my Democratic colleagues. We have to continue to fight. We have to continue to stand. We have to continue to ensure that the American people know that we're in this battle for the clean energy future for the next generations of young Americans who are out there depending upon us to lead that fight for them. And with that, Madam President, I yield back.
President.
Senator from Iowa.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to speak up to 5 minutes preceding this evening's scheduled vote.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, today the Senate will vote to advance the nomination of Dr. Casey Mulligan to be the Chief Counsel of the Office of Advocacy at the Small Business Administration. I strongly urge my colleagues to vote yes in support of his nomination. Over the past few years, the cost of regulations for small businesses has been out of control. The previous administration created more than 1,100 final rules costing $1.8 trillion. The Biden administration's regulatory costs were 600 times higher than that of the first Trump administration and 3.7 times higher than that of the Obama administration. In stark contrast, during his first 6 months back in office, President Trump's deregulatory actions have already saved an estimated $86 billion and 52.2 million hours in paperwork. Small businesses back in Iowa and across the country can now spend more time building their business and hiring employees instead of dealing with pointless red tape. While SBA Administrator Loeffler and the White House are working hard every day to optimize the regulatory landscape, small businesses deserve a Senate-confirmed Chief Counsel to help advance this mission. The Office of Chief Counsel for Advocacy has been vacant, without a Senate-confirmed occupant for nearly a decade. This key role champions the interests and protection of small businesses, and President Trump nominated a highly qualified individual for this role. Dr. Casey Mulligan's unique mix of academic success and real-world experience makes him an ideal candidate for this job. Dr. Mulligan received his PhD in economics from the University of Chicago, where he currently serves as an economics professor. In addition, Dr. Mulligan also owns 2 small consulting and economic research businesses. Over the years, he has conducted extensive research on the economic effects of regulation on small businesses. At the SBA Office of Advocacy, Dr. Mulligan will serve as an advocate for small businesses nationwide. Madam President, the Office of Advocacy's duty remains the same regardless of party: to stand up for the little guy and warn regulators when their proposals could harm small firms. Dr. Mulligan understands the significance of Main Street and the need to evaluate every burden placed on America's entrepreneurs. Again, I urge my colleagues to support the confirmation of Dr. Mulligan as Chief Counsel of the Office of Advocacy at SBA. I yield the floor, Madam President.
Under the previous order, the question occurs on the Lucas nomination.